Hi everyone, Kimberly here, Faculty Success Coach. I have a special guest interview for you today with Hannah DeKaiser, a nonfiction book coach, editor, author, and proofreader. Hannah's going to share some insights on how faculty authors can work with editors to get their work out into the world. We talk about different types of editing, how to find the right editor for you, and how to enjoy the process of being edited. Even if you're writing articles instead of books, there's still a lot of great information. Let's jump in.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, Kimberly. I am a nonfiction book coach, editor, and proofreader. And all of the work I do is to help writers get their work into the world without grinding themselves to a pulp in the process.
I am so glad that you are here today. I've been interested in following and I've read your book and it's excellent. And I hope others will read it as well. Before we talk about what's in the book, I would like to talk a little bit about your writing process because I know many faculty authors in particular feel like they don't know how to get started. They're not sure what to do.
Sure. Yeah. I think my experience is going to be a little different than the typical faculty experience because as an academic, you're under pressure to actually publish on certain timelines. And I self-published my book. So I did it when I wanted to, in the way that I wanted to, which is in many ways a luxury. And I kind of backed into writing my book, sort of like sidled in sideways. I started off thinking I was going to write a web page for my site that was like, what are the different kinds of editing actually? Because it turns out there's a lot of confusion about that. And when in your manuscript's life are they useful to you? And so it started as just a site, and then I kept writing. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll make an ebook, just a PDF, $2 thing, whatever. And then I kept writing. And my husband saw me on the couch at 9 p.m. at night. He was like, what are you doing? Why are you still working? I was like, I think I might be writing a book, actually. And once I realized that, I had to take it seriously because helping people write good books is what I do. And so I went through the whole process that I help other authors with for my own book. Which was great to do it from this side, the authors.
Yeah, gives you a different perspective, I'm sure, on how you help your authors when you've actually been through it on your own. You mentioned that you had a website and a blog and you were going to kind of make a post about that. So you were doing some editing for people before that.
I got started in editing a very long time ago when I was in college myself. My dad is a writer, actually. Started didn't stand a chance on the book front. Or you could optimistically, the other side of that is I saw that it was possible to make a life with words, which is why the book is dedicated to him. But so he and his co-author were putting together an edited volume and they needed help with it when I was in college, and they hired me just start to learn the ropes, give them some extra really basic assistance. And I was hooked. I really loved it. I loved the process of turning disparate ideas into one book-shaped object. And so after college, I interned and then briefly worked for a publishing company in Boston. And then I kept doing some editorial work as one of many hats that I wore to support a professional artist career for a really long time. And then when the professional artist thing was not the season of my life anymore, I made editing my full-time work. Because that bug for working with words and helping people express their ideas clearly has never left me. So I've done, lots of training to support it and worked with many, many books and many, many authors at this point. I keep the dance thing alive a bit by helping writers think through how their physical selves interact with their work and can support their work as well.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about that, helping writers think about their physical selves and their actual writing selves.
I could nerd out about this all day. I really have seen over and over again how much our bodies take up bandwidth in our brain, and we often don't realize it. And so we can use that to our advantage if we are intentional about it and use our body to help us come into writing with more ease, exit writing with more ease, especially when somebody's juggling so many responsibilities from a faculty position. If you're a parent, if you're trying to work at home and you only have this little corner of your living room desk, how do you make that space work for you instead of against you? It's basically, I like to look with people at sources of physical friction and how we can turn those into fuel instead.
I know that sometimes if I'm in a little bit of a slump and like, what should I work on next? Then I go to the coffee shop, which is not really exactly about my physical body, but just being in the different space with different sensory input gets me
That
started
is
in a
exactly your
different way.
physical body. Yeah. Changing the space we're in can make a huge difference.
What kind of spaces do you like to be in when you're doing your writing?
I'm lucky enough to have a small home office that has windows on 3 sides, which is a real delight because I get to stare out at the squirrels and the birds and the flowers. I have natural light, which is important to me. I also like to go to coffee shops. If I'm having trouble concentrating at home, I'll go to the library or to a coffee shop when I can. I'm a really big believer that changing up our physical space can change how our brain is functioning. So I, like you, go elsewhere sometimes. But I would say like at my desk is a pretty solid spot
Yes.
for me because I've worked on making it a space where I feel comfortable and creative.
You said you put yourself through the process that you put your authors through. So kind of what does that look like when you were working on your book?
Yeah. Well, the process is different for the different authors who are kind of going traditional publishing, academic publishing versus self-publishing. But um, so I had a writing phase, which lasted about November to March-ish. I had about a month of pretty bad writer's block in the middle where I did not want to work on this book at all. I need to talk about how I got over that. After the writing was done, I worked with an editor for a heavy copy edit. We did some back and forth because she offered revision support as part of her work. I hired and signed on with a designer to do the cover and the layout. I hired a proofreader to check the very final layout. I also, because I'm a proofreader, checked the final layout. We both found stuff, but I don't recommend that authors proofread their own work without also hiring someone else because we miss everything. We make assumptions because we're too close to the work. So, of course, my proofreader found lots of things I didn't. And then I did a sort of marketing crash course for myself about a month before publication. And then I published about a year after starting writing. And I could have definitely compressed that timeline, but I was doing it on top of working for many clients and having a family. And so I just took it at the pace that felt easeful to me, which again, I was self-publishing, had the luxury of doing.
Yes, many faculty are on some sort of timeline for tenure or promotion or something. How did you get past that writer's block? Because I know a lot of authors struggle with, they know that they're supposed to be writing something and they kind of have ideas about what that should be. But when they sit down, they're like, there's nothing coming out of my head. How did you overcome that?
Yeah, that's a state that I am very familiar with personally and as a book coach that I come in alongside and partner people in that state a lot. And I know it can be very painful and frustrating. So everyone will have their own method. The thing that ended up working really well for me was putting myself, again, physically in a space that made me feel like myself, not my parent self, not my business owner self, but my creative whole self. So for me, that was going to a dance class in the evening because I was a dancer. So I was moving my body, doing a thing that I loved that really gave me energy. And then I took my laptop to the neighborhood bar and sat for a couple hours and had a glass of wine and a snack and just wrote. And having that sense of self alongside me somehow really helped the words come. And I did that a handful of times. And I had to, once I realized that it was working, I had to have relational conversations, like, talk to my husband and say, hey, this is what's really working. Can we block off these Wednesday nights for the next couple of weeks so that I can take this time to work on my book? Fortunately, he's supportive and was all in and can stay home with our kid. But I think that's sometimes a missing step that authors forget about too, is that once you realize something's working, or if you think something might work, often it's more possible than we think if we have a conversation with somebody to get some support.
And I like that you didn't think I have to get this done in my regular 9 to 5. I mean, faculty members have a really flexible schedule, and I realize you work for yourself, so you have a really flexible schedule, but you probably like to have evenings and weekends when my family is around.
Yeah, weekends are harder for me because my son is young, and I also do value family time for sure. I kept finding myself having ideas awkwardly late in the evening, like 8:39. So I would sit down on the couch to write
Mhm.
then, and then be up kind of later than I wanted to and pay for it the next morning. But it usually felt worth it to get some ideas out
Mhm.
on the page. I found that I was more generative in the sort of atypical hours, and so I rolled with that.
I think that's important for us to identify when our brains are on fire for that kind of creative work. So trying to work with who we are and how our brains work is
Absolutely.
important. The other thing I wanted to ask you about related to what you said is you did your crash course in marketing. And I realized that people who are doing traditional publishing or academic publishers, they have some support with marketing, but more and more faculty are responsible for some of their marketing, no matter how they're publishing. Um, and I think this is true even though today we're talking about books, but when a faculty member publishes an article, if they want that article to be cited, then they need to tell people that it exists. So that's kind of a much smaller scale, but another type of marketing. So what were kind of your biggest takeaways on getting the message out there that you had a book coming out that was going to be helpful to people?
A big piece of it was mindset shift for me, away from seeing marketing as this is what's going to sell copies of my books. I better figure out how to do it, to, hey, I have a useful tool here and I want people to have this in their hands so that they can feel better as they are writing their books and they can thrive inside these editorial partnerships. And so I think one big takeaway is simply, what's the root of why people might be interested in what you're writing? What's the kind of
Mhm.
service orientation? And it's easier, at least for me and for other writers that I've talked to think about spreading the word about their book from that service orientation than it is from a
Mhm.
sales orientation.
I think that's true, especially because most academic faculty members who are writing aren't getting any financial return on their investment.
And you're part of a network of ideas, and the repercussions of your ideas being part of that network are going to be long lasting, which is a wonderful thing.
Right.
Many of us, all of us, most of us have more people who care about us as humans and are interested in our work because of that than we maybe think of. And so using the people who care about us as humans as amplifiers of our message is, I think, a really useful way to think about marketing our book as well.
You may have heard of Dunbar's number. He found that essentially they have communities of about 150 people in their network that they know. We have this really inner circle, and then we have a slightly outer circle, and then the bigger circle. And all of those people connect to other people with their own network. So using and leveraging those people in our networks to get information out about a book, to get information out about coaching services, to just say, hey, I wrote this article. Someone you know might like it.
Yeah.
All of those things can
Yeah.
be really helpful, and taking advantage of those relationships we already have instead of just thinking I have to build a lot more relationships with other people. Yeah.
Really making it easy for those people to share your work is pretty important,
Mhm.
rather than just saying, I wrote this book. Could you tell people about it? I wrote this book. Here's the link. Can you
Right.
please share it with your people? Right. The little steps that we can do to make it as easy as possible for other people to spread the
Mhm.
word makes a big
Yeah. I want to shift a little bit from your writing process to your book, which is all about enjoy being edited. And I think a lot of faculty would be like, I don't understand how that could be enjoyable at all. What do you hope readers get from your books?
Most fundamentally, I want people to put down the book feeling more confident and capable and clear about their ability to write a really excellent book
Mhm.
and to partner with professionals to make that happen. So part of that is seeing editing as nourishment and an opportunity rather than a duck and cover experience.
Mhm.
Part of that is finding an editor you really click with and feel that you can trust with your work and your ideas and your writing. And part of that is knowing what to ask and how to approach the edit to get the most out of it. And I kind of go through all those things in the book.
One of my favorite parts of your book is actually the decision tree that's like, where are you in the process? It's one of my favorite parts because it clearly shows that editing is not just a one step in a process. You can actually use editing in multiple parts of your writing process for books, for articles, for whatever.
Absolutely. It's not only faculty writers who see editing as a final polish. Many, many writers do. So there are, for books, I would say kind of 3 main stages of editing that really break down into 4. So there's big picture structural help, which is sometimes called developmental editing, sometimes called structural editing, sometimes content editing, sometimes substantive editing, just to make your life hard. I'm really sorry. That whatever you call it, that looks at the manuscript, whether it's article or book, from a big picture perspective and says, hey, are you giving the readers everything they need to know? What's missing here? Where are the holes? Are you connecting your ideas clearly? Are you speaking to your audience at the level that you want to be speaking to them at? Does everything flow in this order that you have it, or would it really be better if you stick this section at the beginning, because then that lets the ideas flow clearly afterward? And that can happen with a finished draft, or it can happen kind of as you're developing the ideas. If you want to partner with somebody to help you make the structure solid from the beginning, have a sounding board to help you catch those holes really early, that is also available either through a coach's work or through a developmental editor's work. When that kind of big picture work is done, you move to what I call a language edit. And that kind of breaks down into line editing and copy editing. And line editing, as I define it, and again, this is a little bit fuzzy around the edges for different editors, so talk to your editor to find out how they define it, is focusing on flow at the word and sentence level. It's focusing on your voice. It's helping your ideas shine really clearly through each of the transitions that you're making between paragraphs. It's saying, hey, you talked about wanting to write more straightforwardly than your genre usually does, but you're getting pretty obscurantist here. Do you want to fix that or not? That kind of thing. And after a line edit, there's usually space for revisions still. So you accept changes, reject changes, rewrites, whatever, still available at that point. A copy edit is grammar, consistency, well-ordered sentences. All your details are correct. Fact checking may be lumped in with some of this for some copy editors, might be separate for other folks. And that's really a final getting it right, making it look great. Please don't revise after your copy edit, or you'll be introducing new errors for everybody, and everybody will want to pull their hair out. And then the proofreading is the very, very, very final stage, ideally after layout, if you're working on a book, to check formatting, any typos that have snuck in, because they always do. And figures, captions, tables, table of contents, page numbers match the actual page numbers, all the citations are correct, that kind of stuff.
And at this point, technology went a little kooky in our interview. So for the rest of the interview, you can see and hear Hannah just fine, but you cannot see me or hear me at all. So I have recorded some semblance of what the questions were that she was responding to. So I'll look like this for the rest of the video. Have fun. So faculty might feel like when they get their paper back, there's just going to be a whole lot of corrections and fixes as if they were in high school again with a bunch of red marks all over their paper. But what I hear you saying is that an editor will give suggestions and recommendations and not just corrections like this is the correct way to do it. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I would say copy editing and proofreading, because they're really final polish things, do tend to be more correction oriented, for lack of a better term. But the earlier you're working with an editor, the more room there is for conversation and communication and back and forth work. I think a lot of it comes down to knowing what you want for your manuscript, or being willing to have a conversation with your editor to think through what you want, what your expectations are for the manuscript and for your own writing process. Do you want to use editing as an opportunity to deepen your skill as a writer or not? Both are okay, but how the editor approaches your work and how you respond to that work will be different. So it's great to think through what you want ahead of time and have a conversation with your editor about it. So they're not trying to explain things to help you develop your craft and you don't actually care. You just don't have any time and you need to get this article out the door. Please just say what you want to say and get it done. That's really fine. It just depends on what you need out of it.
Can you talk a little bit about the time frame involved and how early you need to get work to the editor and how long that process is going to take? Let's say I have a grant proposal that's due in mid-June. What would that schedule look like?
Well, I'm going to kick it back to you and ask, what kind of editing help do you want? If you want somebody to look it over for cleanliness and correctness, more of the copy editing side of things, you don't need a lot of time after the edit to approve those changes, right? So you can have an editor work on it in late May, for example, and that will be okay. Copy editors often book out anywhere between 1 to 4 or 5 months. So approach people earlier than you think you need to. General good rule of thumb, I would say. If you are hoping for help with the structural stuff, if you want to find out how your ideas land to somebody who hasn't been living in your brain for the last however many years and thinking about this topic for the last however many months or years, which an editor is also really good for, then you want to bring them on board early enough in your process so that you have time to incorporate their feedback before you have to submit, right? Like, don't get it back from the editor June 1st. If it's due June 5th, you're setting yourself up for pain. And I would say developmental and line editors often book out kind of more in advance because that genre of work usually takes a bit longer than a copy edit.
Often when I talk with authors, they are worried that editors are judging them and their work. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of editing?
Yeah. It's a vulnerable process. I just want to acknowledge that really clearly. You're not alone in feeling that fear. If you do, the second most common fear that came up in all the surveys that I ran for my book. And it is, there's always going to be some level of vulnerability in making your tender, special ideas available to someone else who is there to support, and it can feel like tear apart what you're doing. Good editor is not going to tear apart your ideas. I like to make a distinction between judgment as being, wow, this person's really not that good at writing, and judgment as discernment, which editors have to bring to their work. We are using a really informed discernment to make judgments about whether your writing is doing the job that you want it to do and is serving the reader in the way you want to serve the reader.
I just want to touch again on that flow chart in your book that helps you see where you are in the process and what type of editing you might need. Can you talk a little bit about your process of working with an editor on your book?
I also loved working with an editor on my own work. I definitely felt the pulse of fear as I sent it off to her. And it was really exciting to get her comments back and say, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's a great idea. Or I'm going to stick to my guns on this one. No, thank you. It was a wonderful chance to refine my own thinking about the manuscript and to learn about another editor's work too. And it was made easier by the fact that I had conversations with her, like the ones that I encourage people to have in my book. I had seen the sample edit, so I knew how she was going to leave her edits for me, and I could check that worked for me, that it was feedback I could hear and accept. So having done due diligence to find the editor I wanted to work with really did help that fear.
Of course, I'll be linking to your book down below, but do you have other resources you would recommend for faculty authors to take a look at as they're getting started with writing and revising their work and maybe sharing it with an editor?
Yeah, so I basically think that anything Laura Portwood Stacer puts out into the world is gold for academic writers. And she's so helpful in terms of helping faculty know how to navigate the system of publishing. So I highly recommend her courses, her book, her newsletter, anything you can get your hands on by Laura, go get your hands on it. I love, in terms of sort of craft books that are relevant to faculty writers, Steven Pinker's Sense of Style and William Germano's On Revision, I think are both fantastic for building writing craft, translating thought into clear writing. And then, writing the first draft is just the beginning of the process, really. And so getting kind of insight into how to make revision really effective, how to go back into your draft, use it to think through your ideas newly, really strengthen it. I think the title On Revision is a wonderful resource for that.
It is clear that a lot of care and attention was to put into writing your book and the revision, editing, copywriting, proofreading process. It's really a wonderful resource that I for sure will link below.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for being here today. And if you wouldn't mind, just share with our viewers where they can find you online.
I live on my website, hannahdk.com, and on LinkedIn, which you can search for Hannah DEK editor, and you'll find me there. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Wow, that was such a good interview with Hannah. I'm so glad she was able to join us, and I hope you found that information helpful about how to partner with editors to get your manuscript, your book, or your article out into the world. I especially love her advice on identifying what type of editing you need and communicating directly with your editor to make sure that you're on the same page about what type of edits you need and how you best receive that feedback and how they're going to give that feedback to you. And the very best part was reframing editing to think about someone judging you to instead thinking about it as a nourishing process that's going to bring your work to life. Be sure to check out Hannah's website, hannahdk.com, and connect with her on LinkedIn. Until next time, keep exploring to find what works for you.